Even though the Erie Canal quite literally helped shape this nation, this is what so many people think of first when the canal comes up in conversation.
I've got an old mule and her name is Sal. 15 years on the Erie Canal.
But except for the fact that mules did indeed drag boats along the Erie Canal, from Albany
to Buffalo.
Even singer and historian Dave Ruck will tell you the song actually has very little to do with it.
Is there any evidence that it was ever actually sung on the Erie Canal, except for situations like this?
Turns out it's a 20th century song. It's actually written by a professional songwriter who was from, of all places, Massachusetts. So this man, Thomas S. Allen, he comes to Rochester, New York around 1910, sees the canal for the first time, hears the phrase low bridge, everybody down, low. And he ends up composing the song. It's the only canal song he wrote.
So he wasn't a canalman?
Not only was he not a canalman, but no one ever sang the song on at least on the 19th century canal.
The canal, which turned 200 years old last Tuesday, was championed by a man who was as stubborn as a mule. DeWitt Clinton, mayor of New York City, who became governor of the state. He spent 10 years fighting to sell this project to a deeply skeptical public.
It was hard. It was not an easy sell. These landowners that are listed.
Brad Utter is an historian at the New York State Museum. Presidents Jefferson and Madison refused to help fund the canal, so Clinton had to raise the $7 million needed to build it. Some people thought it was a great idea, but
not with my money. You're a little crazy because you're trying to go through swamps and virgin forest, and there's no labor, there's no machinery to do that kind of thing. This is all new.
It was a gargantuan undertaking for a nation just 41 years old. The canal would be dug by hand, every inch of it, for 363 miles. It would be 40 feet wide and 4 feet deep. 83 locks would have to be built. But Clinton kept at it, financed the project with some state money and by selling bonds, and construction began July 4th, 1817. It was completed in just 8 years.
On time, in advance, and under budget.
Really?
Yes.
If only.
Yeah.
If only we could do that.
It's many miles to Buffalo, oh, that low bridge.
A trip that could have taken 6 weeks before the canal now took less than 1 week and cost 1/10 of an overland trip. So as soon as it opened, the canal was overwhelmed with traffic, and it paid for itself with tolls in just 10 years.
Over 100 years old.
John McKee operates the locks in Lockport, New York.
Sometimes there was a day or two wait just to get through the locks. Boats would be packed up on both sides of the banks right here. And of course, while they were lined up waiting to go through, they would spend their time and money in town here, and that added to the population here in Lockport.
Population grew in towns all along the canal. Rochester, New York Mayor Lovely Warren traces the beginnings of her city to the canal.
The Erie Canal was the foundation of Rochester. It was the foundation of our industry. And we were a flour mill city, and that's the way that Rochester first started to build itself up. Population started to grow once the Erie Canal came into fruition.
But the canal also accelerated the western expansion of the nation. People and commerce were able to reach and develop what would become the American Midwest. A region that was isolated and landlocked was now connected via the canal and the Hudson River down to New York City and the world.
Within a year or two, there were already calls of, hey, let's make it bigger.
And they did. By 1862, the canal was almost twice as wide and twice as deep. People and goods and ideas flowed 24 hours a day in both directions.
The impact that the internet has had on our culture and our society is very similar to the impact that the canal had. Sharing ideas, making things faster.
The canal was used to bring slaves to freedom. And
Part of the Underground Railroad.
part of the Underground Railroad. Frederick Douglass would bring slaves here and actually lead them to freedom.
The first women's rights convention was held in Seneca Falls, a canal town. And Joseph Smith started the Mormon religion in Palmyra, along the shores of the canal. But the progress and prosperity was not shared by all. The canal was dug right through traditional Native American land, displacing many who lived there to make way for the commerce that grew steadily for decades, until the next great advance, railroads.
The Iron Horse was there. The railroad was there to compete. And the canal was more efficient. You could pull more with less energy and it's cheaper, but the railroad was fast.
The railroad took passenger traffic first, leaving the canal boats to haul mostly freight. But by the 1950s, most of the freight traffic was gone too.
Let the boats pass the next one.
Today, most of the boats John McKee puts through the locks are pleasure craft. The gates are opened by motors that are a century old. McKee and most everyone who works on the canal system feels the history of what in its early days was derided as Clinton's ditch. Josh Pagan keeps digging today to keep the canal deep enough.
I realized that I worked at a museum that stretched from the Hudson River to the Niagara River in Buffalo and connected us to Lake Ontario.
The value of the canal cannot be measured anymore in tons of freight or numbers of passengers that it moves. But it is hard not to be moved by the canal itself and the achievement 2 centuries ago of just getting it dug.
What it represents, I think, is American ingenuity and American spirit. And so the fact that we still have this canal here today, I think it should be celebrated as long as we can keep it here.